Before we begin, I'd like to offer a gentle note. In today's episode, my guest speaks about the loss of her partner to a terminal illness. It's a heartfelt and emotional story, and some listeners may find it difficult. Please be aware of this before listening.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the episode of Paratalk. And on this episode of Paratalk, I am joined by Steph Lay, and we're going to talk about something that I've not ever talked about before. So without further ado, hi Steph, welcome to Paratalk.
Hi there, it's really great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
How did you get into all of it? As a child, were you interested in the strange and the weird, or was it something that sort of grew over time?
It's always been something that I've been interested in a kind of just general background level. So my dad was a huge horror fan. So I grew up with James Herbert books in the bathroom, and I was borrowing Stephen King books from the library at probably a frighteningly early age, but that was not a problem. So it's always been that undercurrent kind of behind a lot of my interests. I love horror films, and generally that's what I consume for entertainment. But the kind of way that it's become more specific and personal is over the last couple of years, really. So, and this is a bit of a sad story. I don't want to depress your listeners too much, but it's relevant to where I'm going with the project. And that I was married for 17 years, and in 2023, my husband was diagnosed with cancer, and we were both massive fans of Uncanny. You guys all know Uncanny; it is huge, but we followed it right from the very, very start. Would sit and listen to the episodes over our lunch breaks in the kitchen together, and we talk about the things that people were reporting there. Jeff was a massive skeptic, so he didn't believe in anything else at all. And we would joke with each other, what would we do? Because we were both goth, though of a slightly dreamy frame of mind, and we knew that one of us would go first, right? One of you's got to. And we had this little pact between us that we would send a signal from the other side to prove that there was something after death. And Jeff's signal that he was going to send to me was, he was a techie, so the whole house is wired for smart lights, home automation, automated blind, the whole thing. So what he would do is he would turn all of the smart lights in the living room bright red, and he would start Tubular Bells playing on the HomePod, The Exorcist. That would be his thing, to show me that he was able to communicate after he's gone. And we'd make references to this, we'd joke about it every now and then. And I can't for the life of you tell me what my signal was going to be. And the last thing that we did together was we watched an episode of Uncanny on the TV. And even then, we were talking about this. When it happens, I'll get in touch. He died, and I never heard anything. It kind of really got me thinking about what evidence exists for life after death. And I'm a psychologist by training. I've got a doctorate in cognitive psychology and the perception of uncanny faces. I've not had a message from beyond, but all of those people in Uncanny and all the other things that you hear about, they have. They've heard something. I signed up for Dr. Kieran O'Keefe's diploma in parapsychology, and I spent a year going to the seminars, doing the reading, and meeting an amazing community of people around that. I was new to all of this. They've made me so welcome. And through that, getting to hear other people's experiences and their stories, my perspective has shifted. I'm fascinated by the experiences that people have and the stories that they tell around them. And it's kind of translated in that to be more about how do I understand the stories that people have when something happens to them that they can't explain.
That's very interesting what you just told me. I'll keep it really short because my listeners will go, oh, he's going to go on one again. I'll keep it really short, but both my parents have passed away, and my father passed away, well, quite a number of years ago now. My mum a few years before that. I had experiences that like you have a dream, right? You usually don't remember the dream. The experience I had with my mum, I had a dream that she visited me, and I was in a waiting room in it's kind of like an airport lounge, and she came in and had a talk with me and told me that she's here now. I won't go too much detail because I'll be waffling. My dad's was a bit different. 3 days after he passed away, I was at home. It's the morning time. I've had a good sleep. I'm like thinking, I need to do this. I need to ring this person or whatever. Then out of the blue, he calls my name just from behind me. And I'm like thinking to myself immediately, did I just imagine that? But the thing was, it wasn't at what I would call ear level. This was above and to the corner of the room. So that's even weirder. It was like it was above me. But the question I'm going to ask you is that even though you made a pact, right? I'm thinking, if you think back and think small, it's the little things. It's the little thing, a certain object, a certain program pops on the telly. I'm just wondering, when this happened to you, that you had this kind of switch go off. What motivated you then to say, I want to do a project?
I've been quite connected on Twitter and then Blue Sky with the Uncanny community, which is great. And they pointed me in the direction of a YouTube channel called Into the Fog. It's a really lovely, close-knit community. And even though I was totally new to all of this, it was an established group. I didn't know a huge amount about the paranormal. In January this year, you can imagine what a channel of that size is like for comments, right? So there'll be thousands of comments, loads of people in those comments sharing their own personal experiences of things that had happened to them. And at the time, Peter was starting to look at doing stories from the kind of things that viewers had shared. So he asked for some volunteers to help go through all of those comments and just pull out the ones that are experiences. And because I've got a background in data analytics and organising stuff, I said, yeah, I'll help with that. And by the way, have you thought of doing it this way with a spreadsheet and some guidance for all the volunteers to do it? So kind of organising around it. And he was well up for that, posted it out to the whole Patreon group. And then after a little flurry of enthusiasm, there was only really me left doing the collating. So I read through, at the time it was about 40,000 comments. I absolutely loved seeing these stories and collating them with the goal that they would eventually be used. And that really got me started thinking about the whole process of how we make meaning from things that we can't explain. And that was kind of the spark that got me thinking about Milton Keynes. Though, long story short, I now work for Into the Fog. While I'm the content and analytics person, I'm now working behind scenes.
So when I said earlier to listeners that I was going to talk about a place that I'm not going to say it's a joke, but people tend to sort of joke about it. It's a location in England, the city, which was built in 1967. Actually, the year I was born. Anyway, it was built to be a modern city. It had everything there. It was going to be a place where you didn't need to travel outside. You decided to do a research on the paranormal and paranormal events in the city of Milton Keynes. You've broken the city up into regions, and each region you're looking at how many paranormal events are happening in each area, and then you're going to correlate all this information into a giant spreadsheet. But what I do want to say because I do waffle, people are going to be going, shut up, Reeves, let the lady talk. But before I shut my mouth, and I promise, before I do that, Milton Keynes isn't just a place that popped out of the ground in the late 60s. Because before that, there were lots of villages, farmland, hamlets. Even the Romans way back in the early days were there. They built a road that went right through it. And I'm interested to hear from you, as well as your research and what you found, and some of the stories that you found. Have any of those been Romanesque or ye olde?
I'll start just by answering that specific question. Not yet. Kind of things that I've been hearing about so far. People have just been so happy that somebody is listening to them and taking them seriously. There's a few that I haven't published yet where I'm talking to people who do have a theory of why it is that they saw a certain child in a certain place at a certain time, because they've looked into that level of detail and history. I think that's why what I'm doing is quite different from some of the other kind of paranormal podcasts and things that you and I have both listened to, where there's a focus on delving into the history and locating it within that context of what was here before. I'm acknowledging that Milton Keynes was built on something, but what I'm exploring are the things that are happening to people now in living memory, not so much about the historical angles for that, because it's not my field. It's not my area of expertise, and I would make a dog's breakfast of trying to delve into that in a really good way. And I would be looking at people's lived experiences as they're happening now and in recent memory.
Have you had a story from one person and then had another story from someone else, and you thought, hang on a minute, these two stories are very similar?
Yes. So you were saying at the start of I've divided the city up into certain regions. I can't take any credit for that. It's how Milton Keynes was designed. So if your listeners know anything about the city, what they will probably think of are the roundabout. We've got billions of them. Though we have this system of things called redway, which cred usually underneath the fast roads that we have, which carry all of the motor traffic. And it means that those redways, our walking routes, can be quite lonely, quite spooky, and quite weird. But going back to the main roads, because they wanted things to flow as quickly as possible, they did that by building a lot of straight roads crisscrossing each other, which created these squares. So each of the squares is basically an estate, or think of like a small village, all of its own. And it's Milton Keynes is made up of, at the moment, 140. We are the capital for new builds. So by the time I finish this project, it could be 116, 117. But essentially, they're discrete region within the city, which each have their own local character. Different people tend to settle in different parts. Like with any city, there's good bits and bad bits, which is really interesting because they were all created pretty much exactly the same. But essentially what you've got is a board where I'm going around and I'm putting pins in those squares where I've had an account from somebody telling me about something that happened there. And that is my goal, to fill the whole grid up with a ghost story in every single grid square. So it's mainly driven by the way that the city's been designed. The very first interview that I ever did was with a lady who hadn't told this story very much before, and she starts telling me about what happened to that. It was a fancy dress shop, and she'd gone in there one day with her daughter to buy a fancy dress outfit for an event that they were going to. It was a shop they'd been in loads before. They were there browsing around, and my witness realised that there's a lot of noise coming from the upper floor, and that's where they kept all the overflow stock. You go up there and browse. They were on the ground floor. And this carried on for a little while, and she went over to the assistant at the counter and said, God, what have you got going on up there? It's really noisy. And at the same time, she looked at the CCTV monitor, which was on the counter, and she could see on the monitor there were figures moving around upstairs. And then the girl on the counter looked at her and said, there's nobody up there. It's haunted. So not only had she heard footsteps and she'd heard people moving around in a completely empty space, she'd seen their images on the CCTV. And this was just a normal thing that happened a lot in this particular shop, to the point where the assistant was totally blasé about it. It was just a routine run-of-the-mill thing. She wasn't concerned. She wasn't frightened. Obviously, Anne wasn't madly keen on this, and she still lives locally. We still talk. I've kept in touch with her. She's a lovely lady, and she shared some more stories with me as well.
What's the most unsettling story that you've heard from all of the people you've talked to?
I think the one that stayed with me most is the story, again, just to kind of loop back, because it is actually in that same part of the city. I'll come back to that in a second. That was on Stony High Street. An encounter that I reported very recently was another shop which had significant poltergeist activity and some really strange things had happened. And it's like 6 doors down from where the fancy dress shop used to be. So Stony Stratford is my nexus at the moment, but those two properties being so close together, absolutely fascinating. Completely different encounter in both. The story in the shop that isn't the fancy dress shop, it used to be a cycle shop. I'll let your listeners read the full story on the blog, but essentially the activity culminated in one night when they came in and found that the bikes had been taken down off the rack, all turned upside down and stood in the centre of the shop floor, and nobody had been in. The alarms hadn't gone off. It was totally undisturbed, apart from all of the bikes had been taken off the racks and turned upside down, which I just find chilling and fascinating and so unusual and deliberate that something had done that. And it's almost playful, but not quite playful. But the one that's really stayed with me is another story from Stony Stratford, and that's a family who had a series of escalating poltergeist activity events over a period of time. It started with your typical dark shadows, things being moved, things being thrown, but it escalated to actual damage to the house. So they had 2 unexplained floods on consecutive New Year's Eve. And when they'd gone out for the evening, something had dislodged a bit of the mechanism, firstly on the boiler and then in the loft, and they'd been flooded out on those 2. And the lady who told me the story, Rita, she looked into it. And this is one where somebody has actually looked into the background, and she found that there was somebody who used to live very nearby, possibly even in the same house, who was murdered, and his spirit used to reappear on New Year's Eve, and he would always drink from a particular pump that was nearby. And she thought back over things that had happened in the house and realised this activity had started when her husband had taken out a big water tank that had been in the garden, and she'd made the link of disrupting that part of the environment, and these things started to happen. So she felt that there was an explanation for that, and that it was rooted in this guy who'd been killed nearby. And she was in the process of getting somebody in to try and cleanse the house and doing something about it from her perspective. And very sadly, the next year, again, unexplained occurrence, there was a severe fire at the house, and the family all had to move out, and they went back just to collect things, but they never lived there again. The people who lived there subsequently have reported the strange thing, that no, my witness has moved on, and yeah, she wouldn't ever want to go back to that property. And I think that one stayed with me because in a way it almost feels like the classic poltergeist story you would expect with the escalation, but the fact that she felt able to talk about that and share that with me. I mean, I'm not really anybody in the paranormal world at all, but that is such an impactful story with so many elements that are disturbing and frightening, and that she was willing to share that for me, and for me to then share that with the world. I found it was quite early on, and that really made me think there's something important here, that people have got these stories to share. So that one stays in an important place in my heart, Rita and her story.
When you listen to stories like that, people have experiences where it's not like just a haunting and I'll get the odd bump or the door slam. At this level where someone's, something is trying to flood you out or whatever, it's kind of personal.
Just they moved something in the garden and something like that set off a chain of events that ended up with them leaving the house in only the clothes they stood up in. It's, troubling.
I would have thought, if I was going to take a random guess, it would be something like poltergeist cases or a phantom hitchhiker. What have you found in the information that you've been collecting? What's popping up the most?
As you'd expect, I've kept a spreadsheet of all of these with categories and degrees of frightening, kind of measured scariness for each of the stories. I can be quite definitive on that. I've only had 2 cases that are poltergeist related, but the one that is cropping up, particularly recently more and more, are things that are happening to people while they're coming out of or going into sleep. So these ones are really interesting because the kind of casual, it didn't happen explanation is you just dreamt it, right? So if something happens around the margins of sleep, like you were saying with the voice that you heard that morning, the typical thing that you do is just write it off as remnants of sleep or a dream. But in every single one of these cases, my witnesses have said, I was definitely awake. I wasn't even dozing at that point. Yes, I was in bed. It was late at night, or I was just about to get up. But absolutely, this happened to me. And they tend to be very similar in that they're the sensation of hands squeezing or pulling or pressing or shaking you as if it was somebody trying to wake you up, but usually grabbing hold of people's legs, occasionally arms, occasionally a whole body. But these are things that you wouldn't mistake as twitches from your own body as you're waking up. Certainly for at least a couple of the people I've spoken to, that sense of dread and invasion has really stayed with them. One lady that I spoke to still has problems sleeping, particularly in strange places. Even now, and this was reported to me for 20 years ago, that there's a little bit of her head that goes, am I safe sleeping here, or is this going to happen again? So there's a shadow, the room goes dark, or there's something moving, but they don't want to look directly at it. For some people, it is just the sensation, but the vividness of that description of hands around shins or hands pulling feet, those are the ones where I've certainly seen almost like a common pattern for that. I don't know if this is something that's typical to Milton Keynes. It would seem really weird if it is. I think if you start listening to a range of stories, particularly ones that people haven't told before, then these sort of personal accounts, I think that they are more likely to come out. And because they know that all I'm doing with this is putting it on a blog, explaining it in as close to their own words as possible, and pinning that blog post to a map so we can see the spread across the city. I'm not looking to explain it for anybody in either direction to prove that they made it all up. Why would I want to do that? Or to demonstrate with equipment or some kind of measuring proper paranormal investigation stuff that there was or that is something in that space. What I'm doing is giving those stories the opportunity to get out into the world and be told. And I know certainly from the more recent conversations that I have, that the real sense of comfort in seeing something which has happened to you as well. And that familiarity and I'm not alone, I'm not weird, I'm certainly not making it up, is really resonating with people, which is quite special.
I've experienced that. I had it when I was a child. I used to wake up, I couldn't move. My bedroom looked out over a large cricket field, so I always like my curtains open because I like to look at the stars. But one of the things about that is it illuminates the room as well. I always wanted to see in my room, but my mum wanted me to get into the mindset of going to bed with the light off. But anyway, so I started to experience what you just described, and it was completely dark, and I would wake up. If I had this old, I wouldn't say it was an antique, but it was a very old wardrobe. It was a very old Victorian style wardrobe, had all the curly bits on top. I would wake up and I could see the way I slept. I could look right down the bed and I could see the silhouette of this wardrobe. And when I woke up, I could see something else by the wardrobe, like the outline of something very tall, nearly as tall as the wardrobe. All I could do was move my eyes. I couldn't shout. I couldn't do anything. And the more scared I got, the worse it became. The fear, the panic. My parents' bedroom was behind me, so I wanted to bang on the wall. If I couldn't do anything, I would be so terrified that I would eventually fall asleep. I had these bouts of sleepwalking as well, where I would literally get up and walk around the house, and my mum would find me downstairs moving pots and pans around at like 3 a.m, talking, and she would have to coax me back upstairs to bed. And she took me to the doctor because what she was worried about was I would come downstairs, unlock the front door and wander off down the road. So she took me to the doctors and he checked me out and he said, no, he's growing up. And I think I was about 10 or 11 years old. I was quite young, hormones and all that. I mean, that went away after a few months. And I'll tell you the one thing that stuck with me is years later, when I was under quite a lot of stress, maybe 8-9 years ago, I remember falling asleep on my bed one evening. I was quite tired and I just saw, when you think, just have a quick lie down and you end up sleeping for like 6 hours. I remember lying on the bed, I closed my eyes and I don't know how long went by, and then I woke up and I thought, I'll get up, and I couldn't get up. I couldn't move. And I became aware of a pair of knees in my back. And I immediately thought, what's going on? I could feel these knees digging in my back, just above my pelvis. And then I became aware of a very big pair of hands around my wrists, holding my wrists together. I could feel like somebody who had me in a bear hug. And I thought, yeah. I thought, for a moment, I thought I can feel a person on me, holding me, but I can't see anyone. I could move my eyes, but I couldn't move my head. I could just look. But I could feel the person on my arms, on my shoulder. And then I thought, oh, I know what's happening. It's some sort of paralysis. I'm still sleeping. My mind is asleep. And of course, the one thing I had learned through speaking to other people was when this happens, is don't panic, is just relax, slow your breathing down, give it 10 or 15 seconds and it will go away. It will just, and it always works like that. It just went away. It just disappeared.
But what is the actual explanation? The fact that these sensations were there and so real in the moment and have stayed with people long enough to still think about them now. I think that means something for that individual, particularly if it then affected their sleep in future, or it made them feel that there was something there that they couldn't explain. That's sort of persistence of memory. And I think the fact that I'm not trying to give the explanation, oh, you sleep well, you're fine. It's a resonant moment that has meaning for that individual. And I think that's really important.
So as we're quickly approaching the end of this episode, I know that you've done a lot of the research into ghosts and the paranormal kind of accounts where you've been putting those together. When people have been telling you their stories, have you ever had any people that have told you stories about maybe weird creatures or maybe even like little gnomes or anything, or fairies or anything like that?
Not yet. So everything that I have so far, you could categorize as a haunting or possession of one kind or the other. In the original kind of pitches where I was going out to people to ask for their stories, I did have something in there about curious cryptids or big cats on the roundabouts or strange unexplained hares galloping through the redways. I think there's probably stories like that out there. Anecdotally, I've heard all sorts of things, but nobody so far has shared anything like that with me. But I guess on the off chance that any of your listeners are based in Milton Keynes or visit here, they might come on holiday here. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. People may see these things and they're absolutely in the scope of what I want to document. And it would be lovely if there were some kind of more variations across the map of unexplained things. Anything which is strange, unusual, and you can't explain in Milton Keynes, I'm up for it. But so far, no, nothing like that. Losing my husband, I never saw that I would have to do a whole life on my own. But I'm doing it now in the company of people who are intelligent, witty, funny, and very cool. So if there is a sign from beyond, maybe the fact that it's taken me down this path and I'm doing this project in the company of some really awesome folk, that's comforting in a way by itself.
So before I end this episode, I'm just going to ask you, now that you've got this ball rolling and the project moving ahead and you're building this database, have you got any plans once you've got all this information to maybe sort of put it together into like a digest, a book that people can buy and maybe read some interesting accounts from people?
It's a really interesting idea. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I started the project just with the goal of using the blog to communicate this, and that's what I've done so far. The stories were freely available. There's no paywall, and I want to make sure that the core of the project is sharing that for anybody to look at, and it does become a community of thought. But so many people have said there is some form of other product in this, and a book would be awesome, I think. And particularly as when I started this, one of the things that came to mind was there aren't any local ghost story compendiums for Milton Keynes. There are for York or Edinburgh, or even Leicester's got its own book of ghost stories. So that could be something that emerges. But the way that I've done it with all the kind of rich photography, it would end up being a kind of coffee table book, maybe. I don't know. This is all potential things that I would love to do in the future. But I also think there's a bigger story to tell around that whole thing of what it means to share your story and for me to be creating this archive for people, because it's an incredible act of trust that somebody is sharing this with me and that I'm then sharing it with the world. So maybe want to pull together something which is talking about this more from a psychological perspective or even sociological, the things that we were talking about with different parts of society being more or less accepting of these things. But yeah, let's have a chat again in a year when I've got all my Greek squares filled and I know more about what I'm doing with it.
It's definitely got legs. Let everybody know what the website address is so they can go visit.
Yes, everything is on cityofsecrets.blog.
Right, I'll add that to the show notes as well, so that people could click on it and go to the website. Well, anyway, Steph, thanks for coming on and joining me. It's been very interesting. One of my more unusual episodes. Yeah, no, it's been interesting. I'm definitely getting you back because it's going to be interesting to say where this is going. And thanks to everybody that's hung with us and listened, and I hope you enjoyed it. And remember to check out Steph's website. And if there is a book popping up anytime soon, I'll make sure to give it a plug. But until next time, thank you, Steph, and thank you to everybody who's listened. And talk to you soon.